Even though it's not as simple as applied physics is chemistry, chemistry is biology, biology to life, and life to art, the idea demonstrates scale, organization, and complexity. A single atom doesn't seem to exhibit any more chemistry than a carbon does a diamond, yet a clusterfuck of atoms suddenly weird googly glop can be found abound, and small bits of chemistry don't seem sufficient enough to produce any meaningful biology. It took how many years before the first single-cell organism arose? Multicellular? How about us? And back when transactions were still done with sticks and stones, cave people were creating art with the same abatasticity that allowed Starry Night and Mona Lisa to exist. What is it about this primordial threading that seems to have stretched itself from the atom to art? Atom to art. Art and science had this pitiful relationship where they can never agree to what they are. One secretly thinks one is better than the other, and neither seem to accept this idea that they're both the same thing, even though both art and science have mystery surrounding its genesis. Talking about the beginning of the universe is like talking about an overnight success. It's easy to ignore all the unseeable parts when the Big Bang is such a spectacle. No one seems enthusiastic about the thousands of failures one has to endure for a chance of being a success, even though these failures are not only necessary, but essential. It seems vain and superficial to only acknowledge and focus on the beautiful bits, like reducing art to just the finished canvas, and reducing what's on the canvas down to just the physical action seems to empty all the magic in which we mere mortals revere and reverberate through those like Monet and Van Gogh. What I'm getting at is, there are more to things like the meaning of the beginning of the universe and art than there are than just the parts that signal these identities in the first place. What about the components composed? Will looking at how something happens illuminate as to why? What is the secret sauce that seems to defy material and reductionism?
If you don't got no sauce, then you're lost.
And why does meaning obfuscate as scale and organization changes? These questions nag at all things all the way down to why anything exists at all. Perhaps not all can be explained by science. Perhaps looking at art can inspire insight as to why. Each step of the artistic process is part of a hierarchy of organization, and each level exhibits varying complexity. Both are related to scale. Organization is defined as a structure, collection of qualities within a system. Complexity is part of the spooky action at a distance that seems to enable unpredictable behaviors to emerge. It is here where the whole seems to exceed the sum of the individual parts. Scale refers to the depth of quantity at which organization and complexity are observed. Time is an essential element that acts as a carrier perspective. At each present perspective in a system, it is impossible to infer the future state. It is only possible to observe in retrospect. At the formative stages, art trends towards a basic state, typically denoted by rough, simple qualities. There is low organization and complexity when compared to later states. Forming the initial connections are difficult on processing due to the lack of experience and knowledge. Any musical beginner will spend most of their time creating technically correct music, such as making things are on beat or in scale. This is perhaps the most universally understood level of basicism. Music can be comprised of no technical faults, yet display a superficial level of complexity. The music appears flat. It lacks a dimension that it should have. It is clear some level of organization is present, but the hierarchy in degree does not yet fulfill the order needed to be recognized as good music. Despite a sufficient amount of organization to bring the music from non-existing to existence, it has not yet fulfilled a spiritual final form. There needs to be more to achieve what this music was trying to make progress towards. Now that sufficient processing has been grandfathered in, exploring unfounded areas stress the system less because more effort can be dedicated towards the exploration process instead of setting the initial connections. This is akin to a gym goer finding it easier to lift heavier weights after initially going to the gym. At each stage, improvement is achieved through organization, both on a micro and macro level. The more organized a system becomes, the more easy it is to replicate and bring to scale. Large scale, even on a micro level, onsets complexity. Something about complexity allows art to achieve some sort of final state from a much previous non-existing state. This microscopic spooky action in the distance seems to have manipulated the system to bring something to be. Cyclical reprocessing of the entire body is thematic. As a system grows, such as a portfolio, the holistic view changes. The new complexity and organization changes the system such that it is no longer fundamentally the same as before. much like no person can ever enter the same river twice, for it is not the same person, nor is it the same river. While organization and complexity grow on a micro scale, with enough, a macro set of behaviors also begin to emerge. Each body of work is fundamentally derived and determined by the collective previous iterations. The experience from other projects begin to manifest through others. A particular aesthetic begins to arise that can only be observed in retrospect due to the nature of needing multiple to determine this higher level of organization. This is why it is difficult to pinpoint which individual bodies are directly responsible from the transformation from bad to good. The macro organization can only be observed after a sufficient amount of time has elapsed. Without this, there can be no large-scale complexity. There needs to be enough time for the cosmic marinade. It is clear organization leads to complexity. Coupled with scale, organization allows for unpredictable behaviors to emerge. Individual notes coalesce into a sonnet. The atom becomes you. There is no way to predict, infer, or read with any verifiability the next state achieved once a higher level of organization hits critical mass. Observing carbon from the ground up will quickly shift from a perspective of a complete atom to seeing that without talking to itself, the carbon somehow organizes itself into a diamond. Why is it that little science this, big science that? Throughout each stage of the artistic process, it is difficult to reliably predict the final state the more organization and scale is required. There is an intrinsic element of unpredictability and unknowability that is essential. There is hidden information that is hidden not out of needing to be discovered, but because it can never be accessed from the parts below. How can we know we're not simply a shadow of something, like how the colors on a canvas are entangled to where the strokes were? So art, like the universe, exhibits a certain quantity of unknowability based on the present state. Simply observing state changes is not enough to explain why the changes occurred. At each level of scale, the organized components are both aware and unable to become aware of their organization until it is sufficiently too late. The individual components have no cognitive bias towards their fate. The colors on a canvas have no more control over their arrangement, despite all the organized materialism. The art requires a higher force. Despite complexities that span multiple planes, in the case of art, from idea to draft to product, there's a certain quality of information that is transmitted across the classes. How is it that the atoms adhere to quantum physics, but people, who are comprised of atoms, do not? Why is it that as we break down our components, the meaning also degrades? Scale also enables observers to recognize the interconnectedness required for complexity to emerge. Things behave strangely as critical quantities accrue, like a cosmic mass falling into itself after getting too big, because it would be futile to explain to a carbon atom that it is too big to become a diamond. Disorganization has proved that at times it is the precursor of organization. Organization is exhibited onto scales both micro and macro, observable and unobservable. All of this organization does not mean disorganization or asymmetry is undesirable. Disorganization is simply a state. Each level of organization and hierarchy of art can only be accurately determined in retrospect. Time acts as a carrier of the artistic value. The difference in the artistic grind between an amateur and a professional isn't just about the art. One can only determine how organized the system is after observing it. One can only observe a system after the process is finished. The process is finished when there is a sufficient level of organization. Organization can only arise in the moment with perceptual spontaneity, because it is impossible to tell if a system is disorganized or organized until a system is formally recognized in the first place. The carbon atom doesn't know when to start or stop becoming a diamond. Each step of the artistic process feels like it could be the last step because there's no obvious mechanic pushing the existence forward. Ultimately, observing art resurfaces the same exact question as science. How does anything become? Just like it is impossible to compose how a particular art emerges until it emerges, it may be impossible to comprehend why. Not because we cannot observe how something comes to be, but because we cannot observe at all possible states. Accepting this as the reason supports the notion that art in the universe exists for the same essential reason, because it is fundamentally unpredictable. It is impossible to infer the final state based off of the systemic information. Each state exists in a way that violates the adjacent areas. The concept of organization also implies that our entire universe, our system, exists simply as a state that is either in its most organized state, and thus finished, or part of a higher organization. If we exist as part of a higher organization, we must philosophically accept that we can never understand the hierarchy we are in. Forces are in play that are beyond our means. In the same way that it is impossible for art to understand why it was created, it is impossible to understand why we were created, because the reasons exist non-locally. It exists in a dimension that cannot physically pass information. And so if this is true, then it means all our reasons for meaning, all of this existence, is something that is totally local, something true only to ourselves, little more than a fading memory in a locked room.
This place is like somebody's memory of a town, and the memory's fading.
Stop saying shit like that.
Existence is something that emerges. It derives itself from a system that contains so much complexity. All certainty regarding origins are obfuscated. Observers suffer through perceptual spontaneity, the sudden change in perception that occurs when complexity transitions into simplicity. There is an epiphany, an aha, to explain why this previously unforeseen behavior arose. It can suddenly be explained, materially, why something occurred. Life arose from chemistry, chemistry from physics, physics from quantum. There always seems to be some tangential relation. Something is always linked to something else. The system changes because of this realization, after which the state begins to change again. Despite acknowledging organization, complexity, and scale, no secret regarding why some things exist has been revealed. All that has been confirmed is that our existence can either exist in a state in its entirety or part of a greater paradigm. If existence is a complete state, then all that lies ahead is decomposition. The system will trend towards the same chaos that organized in the first place. And if our existence is a pocket among many, that it is structured in a manner that we can never know, not out of lack of information or insight or infidelity, but out of entanglement. So even though it is possible to understand the how, the why remains completely hidden. It cannot be observed from any vantage points within our dimension. The unknown lies somewhere incomprehensible. Perhaps because of our physical limitation of our universe, we cannot completely embody the adjacent systems any more than a circle can embody a sphere. Perhaps it is only once the system achieves a state of total non-physicality that the current laws of physics will no longer apply. When the universe finally collapses into itself, all existence is sufficiently decomposed. Perhaps it is here when the big starts to bang.